think they're ready to surrender.
आईएनए की भागी फौजियों पर अंग्रेज देशद्रोह का मुकदमा चलाएंगे।
उन तीनों के बचने के चांसेस कम हैं।
ये कोई आम केस नहीं, कोर्ट मार्शल है। बोला भाई, ये केस आप कांग्रेस के लिए नहीं, सुभाष बोस के लिए लड़ी।
Lieutenant Gulbaksh Singh Dhillon, Captain Shah Nawaz Khan, Captain P.K. Sehgal. Section 41, waging war against the king. You are charged with murder. Do you plead guilty to the charges read out?
ईमानदारी से आजादी के लिए लड़ने वाली अगर कोई फौज है तो उसका नाम है आजाद हिंद फौज।
Safety, honor and welfare of your country comes first, always.
British Indian Army hand you over to the Japanese Imperial Army.
हिंदुस्तान और अंग्रेजों के बीच एक धागा था, वो टूट गया।
इस बार कुछ ऊपर नीचे हुआ तो देश में बवाल मच जाए। अब जनता किसी अंग्रेज को नहीं छोड़ेगी।
रात दिन अपने सीने विच वजदी आजादी दे राग नू बंद कर ला।
अंग्रेजी अफसरों ने साडी हिफाजत नहीं की, तो वो हमारी वफादारी के हकदार किस तरह हो सकते हैं?
आज हिंदुस्तानी फौज के पास अपना असली मकसद है, हिंदुस्तान की आजादी।
तुम मुझे खून दो, मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा।
ये मुकदमा पूरी इंडियन नेशनल आर्मी का है।
क्योंकि हमने वो दिन देखा है जब हमें ऐसा लगा था कि हमने हिंदुस्तान को वाकई आजाद कर दिया।
देश की आजादी की लड़ाई कोर्ट में लड़ी जा रही है और इस वक्त पूरा देश एक साथ तैनात है।
This trial and its judgment shall be remembered throughout history.
Oh, master of the world, it were fitting that a city be built here.
Oh, really? When you're Sultan, build it.
Was it just a jibe of an emperor at his loyal officer, or just an ironic prophecy? But foretelling seems to have played its part in the times and life of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, who laid the foundation of Tughlaq Dynasty from this very fort, Tughlaq Dynasty, which ruled Delhi Sultanate from far northern frontiers to down south in Deccan for nearly a century.
Before assuming the title of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, an officer in the court of Khilji rulers, he proved himself by safeguarding the frontiers of Sultanate from the attack of Mongol invaders. The raids by Mongols were only increasing, with the army of descendants of Genghis Khan knocking on the ramparts of the kingdoms beyond Central Asia to spread their hold.
What is interesting about Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is, of course, first of all, keep in mind that Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was not his name, that was his title. And we don't know his name. In fact, one of the interesting things about Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is that we know nothing about his prehistory. Really, we don't know what kind of background he was from or what he did. There is actually an effort made by the Delhi chroniclers to keep these aspects of the prehistory of many of the rulers quite silent. So the information that we have about him is of the period of his greatness. So we know that he was serving on the frontier under the Delhi Sultans, and as a frontier commander he won great merit and was referred to as Ghazi Malik. As Ibn Battuta remembers, I think, that he was a cattle herder. Amir Khusro remembers him mentioning that in his youth he was an awara mard. So he was given to pastoral habits, serving as a military adventurer, eventually getting problems because of his skills, enough to become a frontier commander. As a frontier commander then, that's when his political prominence rises, that's when chroniclers start noting him.
Nasiruddin Khusro or Khusro Khan, who had usurped the throne of Delhi by slaying Khilji's successor Mubarak Shah, was defeated and overthrown by Ghazi Malik in the year 1320. Crowned as Sultan of Delhi, Ghazi Malik rechristened himself as Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq.
Persian chroniclers also picked up the story to suggest that Khusro Khan Barwari, the slave who had seized power in Delhi, was actually a slave of Hindu origins, and once he had come to power, Islam in India was in danger, apostasy was again rife. Khusro Khan Barwari had killed all the Khilji children, the Khilji women were married off to people from his background. In other words, the old political structures established by the Khiljis was actually unraveling very quickly, and that Islam itself was in danger. At that time, this chap, Ghazi Malik, in other words, a warrior in the cause of Islam on the frontier, turned around and marched to Delhi and seeking to reinstall the Khiljis and protect Islam, which is where the title that he has, Ghiyasuddin, gets to be interesting, because Ghiyasuddin actually means the supporter of religion.
These are the remains of what was once a magnificent palace of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. This fortress-like city was built keeping in mind primarily the threat of the raiding party of the Mughals from the west. Built on the southwest of the existing capital city of Delhi's Sultanate, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq chose to call it Tughlaqabad.
The huge fortress of Tughlaqabad, Delhi's fourth city, built on a highland, had 13 gates overlooking Adilabad fort and mausoleum of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. His wife and even his son and successor Muhammad Bin Tughlaq is buried here. While an old underground tunnel connecting the fort with the old capital city of Mehrauli is not in use, the road connecting two citadels called Qutub Badarpur Road still exists today. The ever-busy lifeline of South Delhi, Mehrauli-Badarpur Road. Even as the kingdom flourished in Ghiyasuddin's Tughlaqabad, its destiny was shortly to be altered. Much like its foundation, the end too is believed to have been predicted by a foretelling.
When Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq has commissioned the building of the fort, so definitely such a huge structure needs a lot of labor, and day and night people are working. Now nearby, Nizamuddin Auliya is also residing, and he is building a Bauli. So obviously he is a Sufi saint, and because of the religious preference and the reverence which a saint has, the laborers are more dedicated towards Nizamuddin Auliya. So what he directs the laborers is that aap raat ko bhi kaam karo. So the laborers say, no, we will work at night at Nizamuddin Auliya's dargah for the Bauli, and at daytime we dedicate working towards the fort. Now what he does is, he cuts off all the oil supplies to Nizamuddin Auliya. The Sultan and the saint were at loggerheads many times. So during the construction of the Bauli, when he stops the oil supply to the dargah, then also Nizamuddin Auliya curses him, या रहे उज्जर या बस है गुज्जर, मतलब या तो ये उजाड़ रहेगा या यहाँ पे गुज्जर रहेंगे.
As far as Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is concerned, we actually have no reportage, no significant statement made during his reign that there was any problem between the two, the Sufi saint and the monarch. By the middle of the 14th century, however, these stories are rife. Now, the context for these is also important. The middle of the 14th century is a time when The authority of Nizamuddin Auliya in Delhi is being stamped in the literary records. This is both in the Siyar-ul-Auliya, the Sufi Chishti text. It's also mentioned in Barani's Tarikh-i Firoz Shahi. It's also repeated again in Isami's Futuh Salatin. So these are later stories. Why they're interesting? Is that in the middle of the 14th century, many years, decades after Tughlaqabad was constructed, if you had to tear down the authority of the monarch, obviously it was felt that Tughlaqabad is a resplendent enough capital that it should become the object of derision, that it stands as a sign of, let's say, fragile pomp, the temporality of Sultanate power. So clearly, on one hand, people saw in Tughlaqabad a huge statement of might and authority. And now, if Sufis have to tear this down, the easiest way to tear this idea down is by suggesting that if it doesn't remain as the center of pomp and magnificence in the long duration, it's not because, let's say, the Delhi Sultan decided to construct another city, but it's because it carried the curse.
Just 5 years into its rule, in the year 1325, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq died. Legendary Arab traveller Ibn Battuta, who was seeking employment at Tughlaq's court, recorded that he was murdered, whose conspiracy was hatched by his son Jonah Khan, who later called himself Muhammad Bin Tughlaq.
His ego prepossesses him. As a sign of his ego, he constructs a huge edifice towards himself, pointing out his might and his glory. How does God intervene? God constructs another instrument, as it were, another structure where he sits, and that structure collapses around his ears. This is Dawla, rife. Here you have, as it were, Ozymandias saying, look at these people who think they're bigger than this world, and what happens to them in the long duration? They're dust. So this is the idea that is picked up in these letters, so in these stories of Tughlaqabad. Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq dies in this really bizarre fashion when a pavilion collapses on him. That stands for what will happen to fragile egos who think they're too big. Now, what we're concerned about is conspiracy. Most likely he was killed by his son. And again, that's the fragility of Sultanate power. It's always about ambition and authority.
Taking over the throne, Muhammad bin Tughlaq decided to shift capital from his father's grand fortress, Tughlaqabad, just 40 days in his rule.
As all other rulers, he decides to build his own capital. And this is very, very important because Nizamuddin, Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya has already cursed Tughlaqabad. So he does not want to live there. Then maybe it is said that because he killed his father, so he has that guilt feeling and he does not want to use Tughlaqabad as his capital. So he goes and lives nearby in Adilabad, which in a place called Naiki Court. He stays there for a couple of years, builds Adilabad, Jahanpanah, and all the other buildings are constructed.
Tughlaqabad was soon abandoned and left in dust. Reduced to ruins, the city's beautiful palaces, bath and courts morphed into an abode of stray animals and an everlasting emptiness. The Sultan then built a new city to house his capital, Jahanpanah, in the year 1327. He wanted an all-encompassing city covering the settlements of Tughlaqabad, Adilabad, Lalkot, Siri and Mehrauli. But the plan to unify cities within single wall was dropped due to budgetary constraints. The remains of Jahanpanah now houses his once beautiful palace, Hazar Sutun, the palace of 1,000 pillars in Bijay Mandal. Standing aloof amid ruins and a thin hedge of kikar trees, Bijay Mandal once witnessed his darbar. The palace is also believed to have existed in Alauddin Khilji's time.
Among one of the most talked about rulers in the world history, Muhammad bin Tughlaq has eked out a space for himself in the annals of history. For several of his decisions were termed ruthless to even bizarre, to even the ones taken by an eccentric man. But as an emperor, he is also remembered for an eye for infrastructure and town planning.
Said to have received a good education, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is also described an art lover, a scholar of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy and physics. He was also known as a brilliant calligraphist and a fairly good poet. He also built the Dargah of Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya after his demise in the year 1325. The resting place is now visited by people from across the world. Soon his authority was acknowledged throughout his vast kingdom, stretching up till areas as far as Telangana to Malabar.
Well, this era also saw migration of people from West Asia and several other nearby countries. All these people who came and settled or rather flooded the new cities of Delhi brought in with them new culture and new ideas in art, literature and even culinary. One dish that figures prominently in several passages of Arab travelers was a traditionally dear-old snack called samosa. In those days, it was a royal dish.
The cherished sambusk in those days was a deep-fried patty filled with meat, vegetables and selected dry fruits like pistachio and almonds. The chroniclers of those times talk of several other dishes making to the royal platter, including gulab jamuns, buns, roasted meat and cakes. His kingdom was also said to have maintained Karkhana in Delhi exclusively for the embroidery work. More than 4,000 silk workers used to work in those Karkhanas weaving clothes for the emperors. At the height of Tughlaq's reign, clothes were imported from China, Iraq and Alexandria. Tughlaq also ordered construction of dams and water masonries. The decade of 1334 to 1344 saw repeated droughts and famines, some even resulting in spree of illness termed Black Plague. It is then Tughlaq ordered the construction of Satpura Dam in Delhi near Khirki village. The construction of dam with 7 sliding gates was used to control the heavy stream of water in those days for the supply to residents as well as for the local irrigation purpose. But the monarch with a flair for infrastructure and non-planning is widely remembered for his decision to move his capital. In the year 1327, Tughlaq decided moving outside Delhi to Daulatabad in the Deccan in order to expand his kingdom and ward off the threat of Mongol invasions.
Daulatabad now is actually a very important center for Tughlaq, for the Tughlaqs, because this is now, let's say, the new Punjab, through which the Tughlaqs will then control the south. Okay, so much in the way Lahore played the role for the Ghaznavids and the early Ghurids.
It is said that he orders mostly the Muslims to leave the city, Delhi, because this again is a decision by him that he wants that in Deccan he wants to introduce Islam. So it is said that the order is very binding for the Muslim population of Delhi that they have to shift to Tughlaqabad.
Well, it's also said the decision to transfer capital wasn't just strategic alone. According to Ibn Battuta, it has also to do with the personality of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Muhammad bin Tughlaq was seemingly angry with the clique of elites residing in Dehli Kona or Dehli Buzurg, which is now called Meheroli, and flurry of anonymous letters filled with criticism and abuses. It was perhaps this very road which was taken by the residents of Delhi on a 40-day arduous journey to Tughlaqabad.
Keep in mind that when Ibn Battuta talks about Delhi, he's talking about not Delhi in its entirety, he's talking about Delhi Kona, the oldest part of Delhi. Okay, so it's that area around Mehroli, that old city is the one he's talking about. That is, and you have to keep in mind who are the types of people that lived in that city. That's the oldest city, that's the city where the old elites resided. This city had always been, as it were, really thorn in the neck of many Delhi sultans, which is one of the reasons why they'd gone to Kilokri, another reason why they'd gone to Siri. Even Alauddin Khilji, when he had his capital there, preferred to stay in his palace of Hazar Sutun, which was between Delhi Kona and Siri. So, in other words, what we're talking about is a city filled with an old aristocracy. And they would look at these new rulers that would come up and not actually give them support or acknowledge them. They had to be frequently coerced. Now, it's that animosity of the old elite for the new elite that turn up in Delhi that Ibn Battuta is talking about, the letters that were thrown in, the hostility. So now, when Muhammad Tughlaq seeks to stamp his authority on the region of Delhi, what does he do? He kicks all of these residents out.
7 years later, in the year 1334, apprehensive of attacks on his north and eastern frontiers, Tughlaq issued another royal writ, this time to shift his capital back to Delhi. The shifting of capital from Delhi to Tughlaqabad and back and forth is argued to have caused a lot of mismanagement, downright chaos, and was even termed disastrous.
See, after the defeat of Tarmashareen, Muhammad Tughlaq wants to march into Central Asia, and he sort of sets up this large army. He sets up raids into Kashmir, into the northwestern regions of Kashmir, to protect the main army route into Central Asia. That campaign into what is referred to as Karachal is a failure. He suffers huge losses in his march into Kashmir, northwestern Kashmir. When he suffers these huge losses in northwestern Kashmir, that's when he gives up this project of marching to Central Asia. That's when he disbands his army. That's when he has to come back to Delhi, because Delhi is now faced with the trouble created by the disbanding of the armies.
A decision which led to birth of a rather infamous phrase, Tughlaqi Farman, was the one where Muhammad bin Tughlaq introduced copper coins. He decided to replace the existing legal tender of exchange of gold and silver to copper. The result was every household in the kingdom was transformed into a mint as they started to manufacture their own copper coins, leaving the royal treasury to doldrums.
Alauddin Khilji follows one procedure. Muhammad Tughlaq, rather than regulating prices, regulates the currency. And the purpose behind that behind both of them is similar. They don't want the infusion of too much precious metal in circulation, because they're paying currency, they're paying salaries in cash. They don't want too much precious metal into circulation, because that will lead to inflation. So by regulating prices or by regulating the amount of gold and silver in circulation. Both of them were attempting to create a deflationary situation in the capital, keeping a lid on prices.
The trade and commerce was said to have been deeply disrupted by the change of currency.
Every home in Delhi becomes a place for minting coins, because it is very difficult obviously to mint a gold coin, but it is very easy to mint a silver or a copper one. So people start minting coins on their own, and they start going to the treasury and मतलब वहाँ जमा कराओ और सोने के सिक्के ले लो. So that was the thing. Now he starts becoming bankrupt. Then he feels that now he takes back his orders.
In the words of Barney,
nearly every house turned into mint and crores and lakhs of copper coins were made. So much so that every goldsmith stuck copper coins in his workshop.
Such was the state of economy that Sultan repealed his edict and ordered that whosoever possessed copper coins should bring them back to the treasury and receive old gold coins in exchange. Barney goes on to add,
so many copper tankas were brought to the treasury that heaps of them rose up in Tughlaqabad like mountains. Great sums went out of the treasury in exchange for the copper.
After this failed move, another of his decisions which caused a flurry of dissent was tax policy in the Wabur region. The increased tax burden on the farmers of traditionally fertile region worsened their condition, who were already reeling under a famine. Many farmers and peasants already paying 50% tax since Khilji's days were reported to have fled and joined robbers in the jungle. But his initiatives to help agriculture production are well accounted to. He established a department called Diwan-e-Kohi in order to improve the agricultural produce. Among other initiatives, the system of communication techniques developed further in his reign. The history has seen Muhammad bin Tughlaq, a powerful monarch and even complex character, coming out with a mixed yet a lasting legacy.
If you were to think in terms of one thing that he did, which had a huge lasting impact, or two things that he did, which had a huge lasting impact on Sultanate history, on Tughlaq history, the first one would be, let's say, his defeat of the Chagatai ruler, Tarmashirin. Tarmashirin invaded India soon after Muhammad Tughlaq's accession. And unlike, let's say, Alauddin Khilji, who took on a very, let's say, defensive position against the Mongols, Muhammad Tughlaq, on one hand, took a defensive position, defeated the Chagatai monarch, and then proceeded to hatch plans to actually conquer, as it were, Central Asia. In other words, he decided to go on the offensive. So that's one huge difference between Muhammad Tughlaq and everyone else before him. And the second one would be, he moved towards a consolidation of Sultanate rule in the Deccan. Muhammad Tughlaq, more than any other Sultanate ruler, reached through the Deccan, attempted to stabilize his conquest there, administered the regions, siphoning money from the south to feed his ambitions in the north. So these two would have the largest impacts. Associated with these two large strategies of Muhammad Tughlaq were all the other little administrative things that Barney focuses upon as eccentricities of Muhammad Tughlaq.
Rising attack on the east and southern side of his kingdom, failed campaign on the western frontiers, and rising rebellion within the ranks of his own army. Muhammad bin Tughlaq's empire was deeply shaken by these developments by the mid-14th century. He died in the year 1351, leaving behind his kingdom in disarray. Was his successor able to quell the rebellion and build an empire of his own? Or was it some other emperor waiting in the wings to chart the destiny of Delhi? We'll find all this out in the next episode of Talking History.